My name is Amaya, and I'm 34 years old. Growing up in a small Oregon town, I learned early that love could be conditional. My mother was always cold, demanding perfection in everything. I still remember the day she looked at me with those icy eyes and said those words that shattered my world. "I'd rather raise a dog than raise you." Little did she know those words would plant the seed for a revenge so quiet, yet so profound. Before I begin my story, where are you watching from today? If you've ever felt rejected by someone who should have loved you unconditionally, hit that like and subscribe button. I was born on a crisp autumn day in a middle-class neighborhood where the houses all looked similar, but everyone tried to outdo each other with their garden decorations. My mother Diana was a successful realtor, known for her sharp business sense and even sharper tongue. She believed in appearances above all else. Our house was always spotless, our clothes always pressed, and our smiles always ready for company. But behind closed doors, warmth was a luxury we rarely experienced. My earliest memories were actually happy ones. I remember being 4 years old, sitting on my father Thomas's shoulders as we walked through the local park, him pointing out different birds and teaching me their names. Dad was kind with gentle eyes that crinkled when he smiled. But he was also conflict avoidant and spent most of my childhood away on business trips selling industrial equipment to companies across the country. "Your father works hard so we can have nice things," my mother would say whenever I asked why he was gone so much. In reality, I think he was escaping the tension that filled our home whenever he and my mother were in the same room for too long. We lived in what appeared to be an idyllic life. We had a beautiful 2-story colonial house with a wraparound porch. I had my own room decorated in purple and white, filled with books and toys that other children envied. We took vacations to places my classmates only saw in magazines. But beneath this veneer of prosperity was an emotional poverty that defined my childhood. From an early age, I learned that my mother's love had to be earned through achievement. When I brought home an A on a test, she would glance at it and ask, "Why not an A+?" When I won second place in the science fair in 3rd grade, she said, "Well, I guess someone had to be better than you." Her words always carried the sting of disappointment, as if my very existence was a project she had invested in but wasn't seeing the expected returns. My younger brother Justin came along when I was 5. He was a beautiful child with our mother's sharp features and our father's easygoing nature. Somehow Justin seemed to naturally fit the mold our mother had created. He was athletic, socially adept, and had an instinctive understanding of our mother's expectations. I watched as he received the smiles and affection I desperately craved. When I was 7, my parents brought home a golden retriever puppy named Goldie. I was thrilled at first, believing this fluffy companion would bring joy into our structured lives. Instead, I witnessed something that confused and hurt my young heart. My mother lavished more genuine affection on that dog than she ever did on me. She would speak to Goldie in a soft, loving voice I had never heard directed at me. "Who's my beautiful girl? Who's the most perfect doggie in the world?" She would coo while scratching behind Goldie's ears. The dog received kisses on the head and was allowed to curl up beside my mother on the expensive living room furniture, where I was never permitted to sit in my play clothes. My 10th birthday party was the first time I clearly recognized the pattern. My mother had organized an elaborate celebration with a bouncy castle and professional face painter. Not because I had asked for these things, but because the other mothers in our social circle had done the same for their children. During the party, I overheard her talking to Mrs. Bradshaw from across the street. "Amaya's doing quite well in school," she said, her voice cool and detached. "Not quite as quick as Justin shows signs of being, but she's diligent. The piano lessons are paying off, though she'll never be concert level with those small hands." I stood frozen behind the snack table, my paper plate of cake forgotten in my hands. She spoke about me as if I were a moderately successful investment, not her daughter celebrating a milestone. That evening, after all the guests had gone home, and I was surrounded by presents I hadn't really wanted, my father gave me a journal with a tiny lock and key. "For your thoughts," he said with a wink. "Sometimes it helps to write things down." It was the only gift that day that felt personal, that felt like it was truly for me. I didn't understand then that my father in his own way was giving me the tool I would eventually use to save myself. As I progressed through elementary and into middle school, I threw myself into academics. If perfect grades were the currency of my mother's approval, I would be rich. I stayed up late studying, joined every academic club, and practiced piano until my fingers cramped. Yet the acknowledgement I sought remained elusive. A 98% on your math test. What happened to the other 2%? She would ask, barely looking up from her real estate paperwork. Meanwhile, Justin would come home with a B+ and receive a ruffle of his hair and a good job sport. The disparity was so obvious that even my father noticed, though his attempts to intervene were weak and ineffectual. "Diana, don't you think you're being a bit hard on her?" he once asked during dinner after a particularly cutting remark about my posture. "I'm preparing her for the real world, Thomas," she replied smoothly. "No one out there is going to coddle her like you do." My father would retreat, focusing on his plate, and the moment would pass. But each incident added another brick to the wall I was building around my heart, another entry in the journal that was filling with my confusion and pain. By the time I turned 13, I had developed a complex relationship with achievement. I both craved it as the only path to my mother's approval and resented it for the same reason. I began to have anxiety attacks before tests, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my pencil. My piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed the tension in my shoulders during lessons. "Music should bring joy, Amaya," she told me, her kind eyes concerned. "You play beautifully, but I never see you smile when you play anymore." How could I explain that every note was a desperate plea for love? That each recital was not a celebration of music, but a high-stakes audition for my mother's affection? The pattern continued year after year. My mother's coldness, my father's absence, Justin's seemingly effortless ability to navigate our family dynamics, and Goldie receiving the unconditional love I yearned for. The foundation was being laid for the moment that would eventually break me, and for the revenge that would follow many years later, a revenge I never planned, but one that would prove more devastating than anything I could have deliberately designed. The breaking point came when I was 16. I had been selected to perform in a prestigious regional piano competition, one that college scouts often attended. For months, I practiced Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a notoriously difficult piece that stretched the limits of my ability. I would wake up at 5 in the morning to practice before school, then continue late into the evening, often falling asleep at the piano bench. My mother had finally shown interest in my musical pursuits when my piano teacher mentioned the competition's connection to college scholarships. Suddenly, my playing was worth her attention. She hired an additional coach to work with me on weekends and scheduled a professional photographer to document the event. Not for my benefit, of course, but for the narrative she was crafting about her exceptional parenting. "When you perform, remember you're representing this family," she told me the night before the competition. "Not 'do your best' or 'I'm proud of you no matter what.' Just another reminder that my worth was tied to how well I could make her look." The day of the recital arrived. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours. My fingers felt stiff and my stomach was in knots. The auditorium was packed with parents, teachers, and those all-important college representatives. As I walked onto the stage, the spotlight felt like an interrogation lamp. I sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. For the first few minutes, everything went perfectly. My fingers flew across the keys, finding each note with precision. I could feel the audience's engagement, that magical connection when music transcends the technical and becomes emotional. Then, midway through a particularly complex passage, my right hand cramped. A sharp pain shot through my wrist, causing me to hit a jarring wrong note. I recovered quickly, but my concentration was broken. 2 more small mistakes followed before I finished the piece. As I took my bow, I knew it wasn't my best performance, but the audience applauded warmly. Several people even gave me a standing ovation, recognizing the difficulty of the piece and the emotion I had conveyed despite the mistakes. Everyone except my mother, who sat stone-faced in the 3rd row, her hands still in her lap. The car ride home was silent. Not the comfortable silence of shared understanding, but the suffocating silence of impending punishment. My father had been unable to attend due to a business emergency, so it was just the two of us in her sleek black sedan. When we arrived home, I hoped to escape to my room, but my mother's voice stopped me at the stairs. "What was that?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm sorry about the mistakes," I said, clutching the railing. My hand cramped, and I lost focus for a moment. A moment. "You embarrassed us for several moments, Amaya. I introduced you to Mrs. Harrington from the conservatory board before the performance. What must she think now?" "Mom, I played a difficult piece. Even professionals make mistakes sometimes." Her face hardened. "Don't make excuses. Justin never makes excuses when he loses a game." "This isn't a game." My voice rose with emotion I rarely expressed. "I've been practicing until my hands hurt. I've been trying so hard to make you proud, but nothing is ever good enough for you." She took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing. "Lower your voice. The neighbors will hear." "I don't care. I'm tired of pretending we're the perfect family when you barely even look at me unless I'm doing something to impress your friends. How dare you speak to me that way after all I've done for you?" Her voice was ice. "The lessons, the coaches, the opportunities I've given you. Do you know how many children would be grateful for what you have?" Tears started streaming down my face. I would trade all of it for a mother who actually loved me. That's when she said it. The words that would change everything between us forever. "Sometimes I think I'd rather raise a dog than raise you," she said coldly. "At least Goldie shows gratitude and doesn't talk back." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there unable to breathe, feeling as if she had just confirmed every insecurity, every fear I'd ever had about my place in her heart. I had always known she preferred the dog, but to hear her say it so bluntly, so cruelly, shattered something inside me. I ran up to my room and locked the door, collapsing onto my bed in heaving sobs. I cried until my throat was raw and my pillow was soaked. Hours passed. Night fell. At some point, I heard a gentle knock. "Amaya." My father's voice. He must have come home during my breakdown. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer, but I didn't stop him when he used his key to open the door. He sat on the edge of my bed, his face tired in the dim light from the hallway. "Your mother told me what happened at the recital," he said carefully. "Did she tell you what she said to me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He hesitated. "She mentioned there was an argument." Of course. She would never admit to her cruelty, and he would never push hard enough to uncover the truth. "Dad, she said she'd rather raise a dog than raise me." His face fell, but what broke my heart further was that he didn't look surprised, just sad and defeated. "She didn't mean it, sweetheart. She was just upset about the recital." "Stop making excuses for her," I said, sitting up. "She meant it. You know she meant it. She's always preferred Goldie to me. And Justin, too." My father looked down at his hands. "Your mother loves you in her own way, Amaya. She just doesn't know how to show it sometimes." "That's not good enough," I whispered. He had no response to that. After an awkward pat on my shoulder and a mumbled, "Get some sleep," he left, closing the door gently behind him. No confrontation with my mother. No demand that she apologize. Just another retreat, another betrayal by omission. That night, as I lay awake staring at my ceiling, something hardened inside me. The desperate need for my mother's approval began to transform into something else, a determination to escape, to build a life so completely my own that her words could never hurt me again. I didn't know it then, but this was also the beginning of what would eventually become my revenge. Not a revenge of anger and destruction, but something far more devastating. The truth. The morning after my mother's cruel words, I came downstairs to find her at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee. Goldie lay at her feet, receiving occasional affectionate pats. My mother acted as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't shattered my world just hours before. "You'll be late for school if you don't hurry," she said without looking up. I made oatmeal. I stood in the doorway staring at this woman who had given birth to me, but seemed incapable of motherly love. How could she sit there so calmly after what she'd said? The oatmeal sat congealing in a pot on the stove, a sad peace offering that acknowledged nothing. "I'm not hungry," I replied, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl and my backpack from the hook by the door. "Suit yourself," she said with a shrug. "Oh," and Mrs. Rodriguez called. "She wants to discuss your practice schedule moving forward." Of course, no mention of the recital, the argument, or her devastating words, just straight to the next achievement on the horizon. In that moment, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I would no longer seek her approval. I would no longer perform for her benefit. I would focus entirely on creating an escape route from this house, this family, this life that had become a prison of perfectionism and conditional love. School became my sanctuary. I threw myself into my studies with new purpose. Not to bring home perfect grades for my mother's approval, but to secure scholarships that would take me far away from Oregon. I stopped practicing piano for hours each day, cutting back to the minimum my teacher would accept without dropping me as a student. Instead, I joined the school newspaper and debate team activities that would strengthen my college applications, but more importantly, kept me out of the house until dinner time. My mother noticed the change immediately. "Your piano playing is suffering," she remarked one evening after a particularly half-hearted practice session. "I'm focusing on academics now," I replied flatly. "Better scholarship opportunities." She couldn't argue with that logic, though I could see she was unsettled by my new detachment. For years she had wielded her disapproval like a weapon, knowing how deeply it wounded me. Now I was building armor against it piece by piece. But the emotional toll was immense. At night alone in my room, anxiety would overwhelm me. I developed insomnia, lying awake until 3 or 4 in the morning, then dragging myself through school days in a fog of exhaustion. I lost weight as my appetite diminished. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and my once thick hair began to thin from stress. On the surface, I maintained the facade of the perfect daughter. My grades remained excellent. I dressed neatly, spoke politely to my parents' friends, and performed the role of the well-adjusted teenager. But inside, I was crumbling. My junior year English teacher, Mrs. Lawson, was the first to notice that something was seriously wrong. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind. "Amaya, your last essay was brilliant," she said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "But I'm concerned about the topic you chose." The assignment had been to analyze a relationship in literature. I had written about King Lear and Cordelia, focusing on the destructive nature of conditional parental love. "Your analysis shows remarkable insight," Mrs. Lawson continued, "but there's a personal pain in your writing that worries me." Something about her genuine concern cracked my carefully constructed facade. Before I knew what was happening, tears were streaming down my face. Mrs. Lawson quietly closed the classroom door and handed me a box of tissues. "Would you like to talk about it?" she asked gently. And so for the first time, I told someone about life in my house, about my mother's coldness, my father's passivity, the dog that received more love than I did, and the crushing words that had been echoing in my head for months. "I'd rather raise a dog than raise you." Mrs. Lawson listened without interruption, her kind eyes filled with a compassion I had rarely experienced. When I finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes or dismiss my feelings. Instead, she said something that would stay with me for years. "Amaya, what your mother said to you was emotional abuse. It's not your fault and you don't deserve it. No child does." Abuse. The word landed like a revelation. I had never thought of my upbringing in those terms, had always assumed that because I was fed, clothed, and educated, I had no right to complain. But Mrs. Lawson helped me see that emotional neglect and cruelty were also forms of mistreatment, just less visible than bruises. From that day forward, Mrs. Lawson became my mentor and ally. She recommended books about family dynamics and emotional health. She helped me research colleges on the East Coast, far from Oregon. Most importantly, she provided the adult validation I had never received at home. Around this time, I also began keeping a detailed journal, a more focused version of the childhood diary my father had given me years before. In it, I documented my mother's behavior, not just her words, But the subtle manipulations, the double standards between my treatment and Justin's, the constant moving of goalposts that made her approval impossible to achieve. It wasn't a revenge plot at the time, just a coping mechanism, a way to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. My senior year, I applied to colleges without telling my parents. I used Mrs. Lawson's classroom computer to submit applications, had transcripts sent directly from the guidance office, and asked teachers to submit recommendations without notifying my mother. I applied for every scholarship I could find, knowing that financial independence would be crucial to my escape. The day the acceptance letter from NYU arrived was both thrilling and terrifying. I had been accepted with a substantial scholarship that would cover most of my tuition. The accompanying letter praised my exceptional academic record and compelling personal essays. I held the heavy cream-colored envelope in my hands, feeling its weight, the weight of possibility of freedom. I hid the letter in my journal, waiting for the right moment to drop this bomb on my carefully controlled family life. That moment came sooner than expected when my mother entered my room without knocking one afternoon and caught me researching student housing options on my laptop. "What are you looking at?" she asked, eyes narrowing at the screen. I could have lied, could have closed the browser and made an excuse, but something in me was ready for this confrontation. "Dorm options at NYU," I replied, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I've been accepted with a scholarship." Her face went through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. "New York. You applied to schools without discussing it with us first." "Yes." "Absolutely not. You're not moving across the country. We've always planned for you to attend Oregon State or Portland University." I took a deep breath. "You've always planned that. I never agreed." What followed was the most explosive argument we'd ever had. My mother's voice rose to levels that would definitely be heard by the neighbors she was always so concerned about. She threatened to withdraw financial support to call NYU and decline on my behalf, even to take away my laptop and phone until I come out to my senses. Through it all, I remained calmer than I knew I could be. My years of journaling had prepared me for this moment, had helped me see her tactics for what they were: attempts to maintain control. "I'm going," I said finally when she paused for breath. "With or without your blessing. The scholarship covers most of the cost, and I've saved money from tutoring. I turn 18 next month, so you can't legally stop me." She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. In a way, she was. This wasn't the compliant, approval-seeking daughter she had raised. This was someone new. Someone who had learned to stand her ground. "Your father will never agree to this," she said, her final card. To both our surprise, when my father came home and was brought into the argument, he didn't take her side. "NYU is an excellent school," he said quietly, "and the scholarship is an incredible opportunity. Thomas," my mother's tone was scandalized. "Diana, she's earned this," he continued, showing a rare moment of backbone. "And New York has always been her dream." It was the first time I could remember my father truly standing up for me. Later that night, he came to my room and slipped me an envelope. "I've been saving for you," he said. "It's not much, but it should help with expenses the scholarship doesn't cover." Inside was a check for $5,000 and a handwritten note. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger sooner. I'm proud of you, Amaya." It wasn't enough to erase years of standing by while my mother's coldness damaged me, but it was something. A beginning. A crack in the wall of our dysfunctional family dynamics. The next few months were tense. My mother alternated between icy silence and attempts to make me reconsider. She left college brochures for Oregon schools on my bed. She arranged accidental meetings with her clients whose children had thrived at local universities. When those tactics failed, she tried guilt. "I don't know why you want to hurt us like this," she said over dinner one night. "After everything we've done for you." But her words no longer had the power to crush me. I was leaving. I was free. And though I didn't know it yet, I was taking with me the seeds of a truth that would eventually force her to face the consequences of her cruelty. My first day at NYU felt like stepping into a different dimension. The campus buzzed with an energy that made my small Oregon town seem like a distant memory. Students from all over the world rushed to classes, talked animatedly in dozens of languages, and exuded a confidence I envied but was determined to develop. My dorm room was tiny. Nothing like my spacious bedroom at home, but it was mine. My roommate Zara was a music major from Chicago with brightly colored hair and an infectious laugh. Within our first week together, she'd shown more interest in my thoughts and feelings than my mother had in years. "So why psychology?" she asked one night as we decorated our shared space with posters and photos. I hesitated, not used to talking openly about myself. "I guess I'm interested in why people behave the way they do, especially families." Zara nodded sagely. "Let me guess. Mommy issues." The bluntness of her question startled a laugh out of me. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to those of us in the same boat," she replied with a wink. "My dad's an emotional black hole. Haven't spoken to him in 2 years." That simple exchange was revolutionary for me. The casual acknowledgement that parents could be flawed, that distancing oneself from their toxicity wasn't shameful, but healthy. These were concepts that had never been openly discussed in my hometown, where family problems were kept behind closed doors. Classes were challenging in the best way. For the first time, I was studying not to earn approval, but because I was genuinely fascinated by the material. Introduction to Psychology opened my eyes to concepts that helped me understand my own experiences: attachment theory, narcissistic personality disorder, emotional neglect, and resilience. My professor, Dr. Hernandez, noticed my intense engagement with these topics. After class one day, he mentioned, "You bring a personal perspective to these discussions that's quite compelling, Amaya." I froze, wondering if my family issues were somehow visible on my face. He smiled gently. "Many who enter this field do so because of their own experiences. It's not a weakness, it can be your greatest strength as a psychologist." Those words were transformative. The pain I had tried to hide might actually be valuable. My experiences could help others. What had been a source of shame began to feel like a potential purpose. Freedom from my mother's constant criticism allowed me to discover who I really was. I joined the campus literary magazine, discovering a talent for editing and writing that had been overshadowed by forced piano practices. I tried foods from cultures I'd barely known existed. I stayed up late discussing philosophy, politics, and art with new friends who valued my opinions. Phone calls home were sporadic and tense. My father would get on the line first, asking about my classes and whether I was eating well. I could hear the pride in his voice when I told him about my straight A's in my first semester. Then my mother would take over, her questions focused on practicalities. Was I wasting my scholarship? Had I considered transferring somewhere closer? Was I being careful in the big city? "New York is full of opportunists, Amaya," she warned during one call. "People who will take advantage of your naivety." What she failed to understand was that I was no longer naive. Life with her had taught me to recognize manipulation and emotional control tactics all too well. During my freshman year, I avoided going home during breaks, citing study groups and campus jobs as excuses. In reality, I feared that returning to that house, even temporarily, would pull me back into old patterns of seeking approval and diminishing myself. Instead, I spent Thanksgiving with Zara's family in Chicago, and Christmas with my roommate from the second semester, Jade, whose parents owned a brownstone in Brooklyn. Experiencing these different family dynamics was eye-opening. Zara's mother hugged her daughter fiercely upon seeing her, and listened attentively to her stories about school. Jade's parents engaged their daughter in lively debates about her classes, clearly respecting her intellect while still teasing her affectionately. These were not perfect families, they had their tensions and disagreements, but the underlying current of unconditional love was palpable. "Your mom just called you an idiot for burning the garlic bread," I whispered to Jade in her family's kitchen, shocked by her mother's blunt language. Jade laughed. "Yeah, but she'll call my dad an idiot too when he overcooks the pasta. It's just how they talk. They don't actually mean anything by it." I marveled at how criticism could exist without cruelty, how families could have conflict without conditional love. These experiences helped me understand that what I had grown up with wasn't normal, wasn't healthy, and wasn't my fault. In my sophomore year, I met Marcus in a comparative literature elective I was taking. Tall, with thoughtful eyes and a quiet intelligence, he challenged my interpretations of texts in ways that made me reconsider without ever making me feel small. Our study sessions turned into coffee dates, which evolved into something deeper. Marcus came from a large, close-knit family in New Jersey. The first time he invited me to Sunday dinner at his parents' home, I was terrified. What if they didn't like me? What if I said the wrong thing? What if they saw through me to the damaged, unlovable person my mother had always implied I was? Instead, I was enveloped in warmth from the moment I arrived. His mother, Teresa, hugged me like I was already family. His father, James, asked about my studies with genuine interest. His 3 siblings teased him mercilessly about finally bringing a girl home, but included me in their inside jokes as if I'd always been there. Over a chaotic, laughter-filled meal, I witnessed a type of family interaction that seemed almost fictional to me. They interrupted each other, disagreed openly, even had a heated debate about politics, but the love never wavered. No one was diminished for having a different opinion. No one's worth was tied to their achievements. As Marcus drove me back to campus that evening, I was unusually quiet. "Was it too much?" he asked, concerned. "My family can be overwhelming." "No," I said, tears suddenly filling my eyes. "It was beautiful. I just didn't know families could really be like that." Marcus reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Like what?" "Real, accepting, loving without conditions." That night, curled against him in his dorm room, I told him everything about my childhood. About my mother's coldness, my father's absence, the dog that received more love than I did, and those devastating words that still echoed in my head years later. I expected pity, maybe discomfort, but Marcus listened with a steady presence that felt like strength I could borrow. "Amaya," he said when I finished, "what happened to you was wrong, but it doesn't define you." His family became a second home to me, a model of what healthy love looked like. Teresa taught me to cook Italian dishes passed down through generations, treating my kitchen disasters with the same good-humored acceptance she showed her own children's mistakes. James took a genuine interest in my psychology studies, engaging me in thoughtful conversations about nature versus nurture and the impact of childhood experiences on adult development. It was during one of these conversations in my junior year that James, a professor of sociology, made a suggestion that would ultimately shape my future path. "You speak about these family dynamics with such insight, Amaya," he said as we cleared the dinner table together. "Have you considered focusing your studies on family systems psychology?" "I've thought about it," I admitted, "but it feels too personal." "The best research often comes from personal connection to the subject," he replied, "not despite it, but because of it." Those words planted a seed that would grow into my life's work and eventually into the quiet revenge I never consciously planned, but that would prove more devastating than any act of anger could have been. I graduated from NYU with honors, my psychology degree opening doors I never imagined possible. As I stood in my cap and gown searching the crowd for familiar faces, I spotted them, my parents, sitting stiffly in the family section. My mother wore a designer suit in navy blue, her hair perfectly styled, her posture rigid. My father sat beside her, his smile genuine but nervous. I hadn't expected them to come. Our contact over the 4 years had dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional email update. I had visited home only twice during my entire college career, both times brief tension-filled weekends that reinforced my decision to stay away. Yet here they were. My father had insisted, I later learned. "We're not missing our daughter's graduation," he had told my mother firmly, one of the rare occasions he stood his ground with her. After the ceremony, they found me among the sea of graduates. My father hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Amaya." My mother offered a cooler embrace and a practiced smile. "You look well. she said, appraising my appearance as if I were one of her real estate properties. The honors cord is a nice touch. That evening we had dinner at an upscale restaurant near campus. My brother Justin couldn't attend due to a work commitment, or so he claimed. I suspected he simply didn't want to navigate the tense family dynamics. I didn't blame him. Throughout the meal, my mother spoke about me in the third person to the waiter to neighboring diners, who congratulated me even to my father at times. Amaya always was academically inclined, she told our server as he brought dessert. I encouraged her studies from an early age, of course. I always say a strong foundation is essential. I watched in disbelief as she rewrote our history, casting herself as the supportive mother who had nurtured my intellectual growth, rather than the critical presence who had diminished my every achievement. In her version of events, my success was evidence of her excellent parenting rather than something I had accomplished despite her emotional neglect. My father noticed my expression and squeezed my hand under the table, a silent acknowledgement of the fiction being created before our eyes. But he didn't contradict her, didn't remind her of how she had opposed my move to New York, had predicted my failure, had withheld financial support until he had intervened. As I listened to my mother's revisionist history, something crystallized within me. This wasn't merely annoying or hurtful, it was a continuation of the emotional manipulation that had defined my childhood. She was appropriating my achievements, using them to bolster her own image while erasing the pain she had caused. Actually, Mom, I said during a pause in her monologue, I think my interest in psychology developed largely because I was trying to understand our family dynamics. A flicker of alarm crossed her face before her smile reasserted itself. Well, all families have their quirks, don't they? That's what makes them interesting. Her deflection was smooth practiced. She had spent a lifetime avoiding accountability, and she wasn't about to start now, especially not in public where appearances mattered most to her. After returning to my apartment that night, I sat on my balcony looking out at the New York skyline, processing the interaction. My roommates were out celebrating with their own families, giving me space to think. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus checking in. We had broken up amicably when he moved to California for graduate school, but remained close friends. "How was dinner with the parents?" he asked. "Surreal," I replied. Mom's rewriting history to make herself the hero of my success story. "Classic narcissist move," he texted back. Remember what Dr. Klein said in Abnormal Psych? I did remember. Our professor had discussed how those with narcissistic tendencies often claim credit for others' accomplishments while distancing themselves from any failures or problems. My mother's behavior at dinner was textbook. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the students in my psychology classes who had shared similar stories about emotionally unavailable parents, about the research I'd read on the long-term effects of childhood emotional neglect, about the journal I had kept documenting my mother's behavior. The next morning, I called Dr. Hernandez, my mentor throughout college, and asked for his advice about graduate programs in family psychology with a focus on emotional abuse and recovery. His response was enthusiastic. "I've been hoping you'd consider this path, Amaya. Your personal insight combined with your academic excellence would make you an exceptional researcher in this field." 2 months later, I was accepted into a master's program at Columbia, allowing me to stay in New York while pursuing advanced studies in family systems and trauma recovery. My thesis topic emerged naturally: Invisible Scars, the Impact of Parental Emotional Neglect on Adult Attachment and Self-Worth. During my research, I conducted anonymous interviews with dozens of adults who had experienced emotional neglect or verbal abuse as children. Their stories resonated with mine in ways that were both validating and heartbreaking. One woman described her mother saying she should have been a dog breeder instead of a mother, because at least dogs are grateful. A man recalled his father telling him he was a disappointment from the day he was born. Each story echoed elements of my own experience. As part of my methodology, I included my own journal entries as a longitudinal case study, changing names and identifying details to maintain anonymity. The process was therapeutic, transforming my private pain into academic work that could potentially help others. My thesis advisor, Dr. Patricia Levine, recognized the power of my research. "This isn't just academically sound, Amaya," she told me after reading my first draft. "It's important work that needs to reach beyond academia." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean you should consider turning this into a book once you've completed your degree. Something accessible to the general public, not just scholars." The suggestion took my breath away. Writing a book would mean exposing the truth about my childhood in a public way. It would mean potentially hurting my family, especially my mother. Despite everything, I wasn't sure I wanted that. "I don't know if I'm ready for that level of disclosure," I admitted. Dr. Levine nodded understanding. "Think about it. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do for ourselves and others is to speak truth that has long been silenced." Those words stayed with me as I completed my master's degree and began working as a research assistant at a family therapy center in Manhattan. There I encountered more stories of emotional abuse disguised as strict parenting or high expectations. I saw adults struggling with the same issues I had faced: anxiety, perfectionism, difficulty trusting others, and a persistent sense of not being good enough. In therapy sessions, I observed, and later in my own personal therapy, I began to understand that what my mother had done wasn't just unkind, it was a form of abuse that had shaped my entire sense of self. Her words, "I'd rather raise a dog than raise you," weren't just a momentary lapse in parental judgment. They were the most explicit expression of a message she had been sending me throughout my childhood: that I was less worthy of love than a pet, that my value was conditional on performance, that I was fundamentally unlovable as I was. This realization fueled a new determination. Dr. Levine's suggestion about writing a book no longer seemed like an exposure of private pain, but a necessary truth-telling, not as an act of revenge, but as a way to break the silence that protected emotional abusers and isolated their victims. I began writing in the evenings after work, turning my research into a manuscript that combined academic insights with personal narrative and the anonymous stories of others who had survived similar childhoods. I changed names, locations, and identifying details while maintaining the emotional truth of each experience, including my own. The writing process was both painful and liberating. There were nights I cried over my keyboard, reliving moments of rejection and longing. There were also moments of profound insight when I recognized patterns I hadn't seen before: how my mother's treatment had affected my relationships, my career choices, even my physical health. 6 months into the writing process, I received a call from my father. His voice sounded strained. "Amaya, your mother found your old journals in the attic. She's been reading them." My stomach dropped. Those journals contained my raw, unfiltered experiences, thoughts I had never intended for her to see. "How?" I managed to ask. "We were clearing space for renovation," he explained. "I didn't realize they were there. And she just decided to read my private writings." He sighed. "You know how she is about privacy." Yes, I did know. In her world, my belongings, my thoughts, even my achievements belonged to her in some way. That she would read my journals without permission was entirely in character. "She's upset, Amaya. Some of the things you wrote are true," I finished for him. "Everything in those journals happened, Dad. You were there for most of it." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "I know. I don't think she ever realized how her words affected you. Or she didn't care," I said, the bitterness I thought I'd moved past surfacing unexpectedly. Another pause. "She wants to talk to you." "I bet she does." I didn't take my mother's calls in the days that followed. Instead, I poured my energy into my manuscript, now seeing it not just as a professional project, but as a reclaiming of my narrative. If my mother was finally confronting the reality of her behavior through my adolescent journals, perhaps others like her needed the same wake-up call. The book took shape chapter by chapter. I titled it, "More Than a Dog Surviving and Thriving After Parental Emotional Neglect." The title was a deliberate reference to the words that had cut me so deeply. Some might see it as provocative, even vindictive, but to me it was simply honest. When the manuscript was complete, I sent it to several literary agents with a proposal outlining the book's purpose and potential audience. To my surprise, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. 3 agents requested the full manuscript, and 2 offered representation within weeks. The agent I chose, Natalie Wong, believed passionately in the book's message. "This isn't just another memoir or self-help book," she told me. "It's speaking truth to a type of abuse that often goes unrecognized and unaddressed. It's important work, Amaya." With Natalie's guidance, I refined the manuscript further. We emphasized the psychological research underpinning the personal narrative's added resources for readers seeking help, and structured the book to move from recognition of emotional neglect to strategies for healing and recovery. 6 publishers expressed interest, leading to a bidding war that stunned me. The winning offer came from a major publishing house known for its psychology and self-help titles. My editor, Sarah Jenkins, was herself a survivor of childhood emotional abuse and understood exactly what I was trying to accomplish. "We need to make one thing clear," she said during our first meeting. "This book isn't about revenge. It's about healing your own and potentially thousands of others who have experienced similar treatment." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. "That's always been my intention." "Then let's make sure that comes through on every page." As the publication date approached, a sense of apprehension mixed with my excitement. I had not told my family about the book. My father and I spoke occasionally. Our relationship improved, but still constrained by his continued life with my mother. My brother Justin and I exchanged birthday and holiday messages, but rarely discussed anything substantive. I had not spoken directly to my mother since the journal incident. Now, with advance copies going out to reviewers and early buzz building around the book, I knew I couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. I needed to tell them before they heard about it elsewhere. I called my father first. "Dad, I have something important to tell you," I began. "I've written a book, and it's being published next month." "A book, Amaya, that's wonderful." His pride was evident. "What's it about?" I took a deep breath. "It's about emotional neglect in families. It includes some of our family experiences, though I've changed names and details." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. "I see," he finally said. "And your mother?" "She's not named or directly identified," I assured him. "But yes, some of her behavior is described." He sighed deeply. "She won't take this well, Amaya." "I know, but this book isn't about hurting her. It's about helping others who have experienced what I did." "I understand," he said, and I believed he did. "Would you like me to tell her, or would you prefer to do it yourself?" I considered this. "I think it would be better coming from me. Could you ask her to call me?" The conversation with my mother 2 days later was exactly as difficult as I had anticipated. Her initial shock at hearing about the book quickly turned to anger when she understood its content. "So this is your revenge," she hissed through the phone. "Publicly humiliating your family after everything we did for you." "It's not revenge, Mom," I said, working to keep my voice steady. "It's the truth about my experience, and it might help other people who are going through similar situations." "Truth?" She practically spat the word. "Your truth, maybe? Not mine. Not reality." "That's the point," I replied. "Children and parents can experience the same events very differently. The book acknowledges that." "I will not stand for this," she declared. "If you publish this attack on me, don't expect to be welcomed back into this family." The threat would have devastated me years before. Now I recognized it for what it was, another attempt at control, at enforcing silence. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said. "But the book is being published. I hope someday you'll actually read it and understand what I was trying to do." She hung up without another word. The weeks leading up to publication were a whirlwind of promotional activities. Early reviews were overwhelmingly positive, with several major publications highlighting the book's blend of personal narrative and solid psychological research. Mental health professionals endorsed it as a valuable resource for both clinicians and patients. Then, the day before the official release, a prominent morning talk show featured me as a guest. The interview was supposed to focus on the psychological aspects of emotional neglect, but the host, famous for her direct questioning, asked about my personal experience. Your book's title, More Than a Dog, comes from something your mother actually said to you, doesn't it? I hadn't expected such a direct question on national television, but I had promised myself and my editor that I would be honest without being vindictive. Yes, I admitted. When I was 16, after a piano recital where I made some mistakes, my mother told me she'd rather raise a dog than raise me. It was a pivotal moment that helped me understand the nature of emotional neglect. The host's expression reflected the shock many viewers likely felt. How does someone recover from hearing that from their own mother? It's a long process, I answered carefully. Part of why I wrote this book was to show that recovery is possible. The journey from being defined by someone else's cruel words to defining yourself on your own terms isn't easy, but it's worth it. The interview went viral within hours. Clips were shared across social media platforms with thousands of comments from people sharing similar experiences. My inbox filled with messages from strangers thanking me for giving voice to their pain and their hope. By the end of the first week, More Than a Dog had hit the New York Times bestseller list. Speaking engagements, podcast appearances, and interview requests poured in. The quiet graduate student who had once desperately sought her mother's approval was now a public voice for those who had experienced similar rejection. And somewhere in Oregon, I knew my mother was watching her carefully constructed image crumble as friends, neighbors, and colleagues recognized our family story, despite the changed names and locations. The truth I had spent years documenting in private journals was now public knowledge. Not as an act of vengeance, but as a reclaiming of my narrative and a lifeline to others. My quiet revenge, it turned out, was simply telling the truth. And that proved more devastating to my mother than any act of malice could ever have been. The success of More Than a Dog exceeded everyone's expectations, including mine. What I had envisioned as a niche psychological resource became a cultural touchstone, sparking conversations about emotional abuse in families across the country. Letters and emails poured in from readers who saw their own experiences reflected in my words, who found validation and hope in my journey. Your book gave me the courage to start therapy, wrote a woman in her 50s. I've spent my entire life believing I was fundamentally unlovable because of how my father treated me. Now I understand it was never about my worth as a person. These messages sustained me through the storm that followed the book's publication. 3 weeks after my morning show appearance, I received a call from my brother Justin, the first time we had spoken directly in over a year. Amaya, he began, his voice strained. Things are pretty intense here. I can imagine, I replied, bracing myself for criticism or anger. Instead, what followed surprised me. I read your book, he said. I didn't want to, but Dad insisted. And you weren't wrong. About Mom, about how she treated you. I sat down unprepared for this acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that. I didn't see it growing up, he continued. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Being the favorite came with its own pressure, I was terrified of ending up in your position. For the first time, I considered what it must have been like for Justin witnessing our mother's preferential treatment while understanding the conditional nature of her love. One mistake, one failure to meet her expectations, and he too could have found himself on the receiving end of her coldness. I never blamed you, I assured him. You were a kid too. Mom's not handling this well, he said after a pause. She's telling everyone the book is fiction, that you made everything up for attention. But the neighbors, her friends, they've always seen through her perfect mother act. Some of them have reached out to me saying they always suspected something was off in how she treated you. The news that others had noticed, had seen through my mother's facade, even when I believed I was alone in my experience, was both validating and painful. Why had no one intervened? Why had no adult protected the child I had been, and Dad? I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Justin sighed. He's finally standing up to her. They had a huge fight after he read the book. He told her he's been enabling her behavior for years and he's done. I've never seen him like that. I closed my eyes, absorbing this information. My father, who had spent decades avoiding conflict, was finally confronting the truth. It was a bittersweet victory. "There's something else," Justin added. "Mom wants to have a family meeting. She's insisting you come home to discuss the book." My immediate instinct was refusal. What could such a meeting accomplish except giving my mother a platform to deny, deflect, and manipulate? "I don't think that's a good idea," I said carefully. "Probably not," Justin agreed. "But Dad thinks it might be important for closure if nothing else. He said to tell you he'll be there the whole time, that he won't let her attack you." After much consideration and consultation with my therapist, I agreed to the meeting scheduled for the following month during a break in my book tour. As the day approached, my anxiety mounted. I hadn't set foot in my childhood home in over 5 years. The thought of facing my mother in that space with all its loaded memories made my stomach clench. I arrived in Oregon on a rainy Friday afternoon. Rather than staying at my parents' house, I checked into a hotel near the airport, a boundary my therapist had encouraged me to set. Justin picked me up for dinner that evening, just the two of us reconnecting before the confrontation to come. "She's been cleaning the house nonstop for 3 days," he told me over burgers at a local restaurant. "Rearranging furniture, buying new decorations. Classic mom focusing on appearances." I nodded, unsurprised. "And emotionally, how is she?" "All over the place. One minute she's raging about how you've betrayed the family, the next she's crying about being misunderstood. Dad's been sleeping in the guest room since their fight." The next day, I rented a car and drove to the house where I had grown up. The colonial with its wraparound porch looked smaller than I remembered, though just as perfectly maintained. Fresh flowers flanked the door and new curtains hung in the windows, all part of my mother's preparation for this meeting, no doubt. My father answered the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me. He pulled me into a tight hug that conveyed both apology and solidarity. "You look well," he said, studying my face. "New York agrees with you." "Thanks, Dad." He led me into the living room where Justin already sat on the sofa. My mother stood by the fireplace, a position that allowed her to look down at everyone else, a power move I recognized from my training in family dynamics. She wore an expensive blue dress and perfect makeup armor against the vulnerability of this confrontation. "Amaya," she said, her voice cool. "Thank you for coming." I took a seat in an armchair, deliberately choosing not to sit on the sofa where I could be flanked by family members. Another boundary, another small act of self-protection. "I think we all know why we're here," my mother began. "Amaya has chosen to publish a book that contains hurtful mischaracterizations of this family, particularly of me as a mother." I noticed she held a copy of my book pages marked with colorful tabs. She had clearly prepared for this confrontation as meticulously as she prepared for her real estate negotiations. "They're not mischaracterizations," I said calmly. "They're my experiences, documented at the time they occurred." "Memories are fallible," she countered, "especially when filtered through a child's understanding." "Which is why I kept journals," I replied, "and why I verified my accounts with multiple sources during my research." Her eyes narrowed. "You discussed our private family matters with outsiders." "No, Mom. I researched the psychological impact of emotional neglect. My experience aligned with established patterns." Before she could respond, my father cleared his throat. "Diana, we agreed this wouldn't be an interrogation. We're here to listen to Amaya to understand." My mother's mouth tightened, but she nodded stiffly. "Fine. Explain to me then how you could publicly humiliate your family this way. Do you have any idea what this has done to my reputation, my colleagues, my friends? They all look at me differently now." And there it was, her true concern. Not the pain she might have caused me, not the relationship she had damaged, but her image in the community. "The book isn't about humiliating you," I said. "It's about helping people who have experienced emotional neglect to recognize it and heal from it." "By using me as your cautionary tale," she snapped. "By using my experience," I corrected. "An experience that included hearing my mother say she'd rather raise a dog than raise me." The room fell silent. Justin shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. My father looked down at his hands. My mother's face flushed. "I was upset that day," she said finally. "You had embarrassed me at that recital, after all the money we spent on lessons coaches." "Diana," my father interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically firm. "Stop, just stop." She turned to him, startled. "I've been silent too long," he continued. "I let you treat our daughter this way for years because I was too cowardly to confront you. I'm not doing that anymore." He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Amaya. I should have protected you. I should have stood up to your mother when she compared you unfavorably to your brother, when she lavished affection on the dog, while withholding it from you when she made her love conditional on your performance. I failed you as a father." Tears filled my eyes at this long-awaited acknowledgement. "Thank you, Dad." My mother looked between us, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling. "This is absurd. I was a good mother. I provided for you, gave you opportunities. Material things," Justin interjected, surprising all of us. "But Amaya needed what you gave me, unconditional acceptance, Mom. I saw it even as a kid. I just didn't know what to do about it." My mother's composure finally broke. "So you're all against me now. This is the thanks I get for devoting my life to this family, for sacrificing my own ambitions to raise you." "This isn't about being against you," I said quietly. "It's about acknowledging the truth so we can all heal, including you, Mom." She stared at me, tears forming in her eyes, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in years. "I don't know how to be the mother you wanted," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "And I've accepted that. I'm not here looking for a perfect mother or even an apology. I'm here because despite everything, you're still my family. But our relationship can only continue if it's based on truth, not the fiction you've created about our family." The conversation that followed was difficult, painful, and ultimately incomplete. My mother alternated between defensive anger and moments of genuine reflection. My father spoke more openly than he had in my entire childhood. Justin shared his own complex feelings about being the favored child while witnessing my mistreatment. No miraculous transformation occurred that day. My mother did not suddenly become the nurturing parent I had longed for as a child. But small cracks appeared in her facade, brief moments when she seemed to truly hear what we were saying, rather than immediately deflecting or denying. As I prepared to leave, she approached me awkwardly. "Your book," she said, holding out her copy. "Would you sign it for me?" The request surprised me. "Are you actually going to read it?" She nodded stiffly. "I've started. It's not easy, but I'm trying to understand." I took the book and inscribed it simply, "To Healing and Truth. Love, Amaya." In the months that followed, our family began a slow, hesitant process of reconnection. My father called regularly, our conversations deeper and more honest than ever before. Justin and I rebuilt our sibling relationship free from the competition our mother had fostered between us. And my mother, well, change came in tiny increments. She began seeing a therapist at my father's insistence. She made awkward but genuine attempts to ask about my life without judgment or comparison. Meanwhile, my professional life flourished. The success of More Than a Dog led to speaking engagements at universities and psychology conferences. I appeared on panels discussing family trauma and emotional abuse. I began a small private practice specializing in adult survivors of childhood emotional neglect. Through it all, I continued my own healing journey. The public sharing of my story, far from reopening old wounds, had helped seal them. Each letter from a reader who found hope in my words added another layer of meaning to my painful past, transforming it from merely a trauma to endure into a gift I could offer others. 1 year after the publication of my book, I met David at a psychology conference where we were both presenting. He was a trauma researcher whose work complemented mine, and our professional collaboration gradually evolved into something more personal. Unlike Marcus, who had witnessed my early steps toward healing, David met me as I was becoming whole, still with scars but no longer defined by them. When he proposed 6 months later, I faced a difficult decision whether to invite my mother to our wedding. My therapist helped me work through the complex emotions involved. "What do you want, Amaya?" she asked. Not what you think you should want, or what would look best to others, but what would feel right to you. After much reflection, I decided to extend the invitation with clear boundaries. My mother could attend if she respected that this was my day free from her criticism or attempts to control. To my surprise, she agreed to these terms without argument. The wedding was small, held in a botanical garden in Brooklyn with just 50 guests. When my father walked me down the aisle, I saw tears in his eyes that spoke of both joy and regret. Joy for this moment, regret for the protection he hadn't provided in the past. My mother sat in the front row, subdued but present, wearing a color I had selected rather than imposing her own choice, a small but significant concession. At the reception, she approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "The ceremony was lovely," she said. "You make a beautiful bride." "Thank you, Mom." She hesitated, then added, "I'm trying Amaya. I know it's late, probably too late, but I'm trying to understand what I did wrong." "It's never too late to grow," I told her, meaning it. "Not for any of us." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace or profound apology. Just a small moment of genuine connection, the kind that can only exist when truth has been spoken and acknowledged. My second book, published 2 years later, focused on healing from childhood trauma. In it, I wrote about my evolving relationship with my mother, about the complexity of forgiveness, about the liberation that comes from accepting that some parents will never be what we needed them to be. True healing, I wrote in the final chapter, isn't about getting perfect closure or receiving the apology you deserve. It's about reclaiming your narrative, setting healthy boundaries, and building a life so completely your own that the wounds of the past no longer define your present or determine your future. The quiet revenge of truth-telling had accomplished what no act of malice could have. It forced my mother to see herself as she truly was, not as she pretended to be. It liberated me from the secret-keeping that had protected her at my expense, and it created the possibility, however fragile, of a relationship based on reality rather than illusion. My revenge wasn't in hurting her, but in refusing to perpetuate the lies that had hurt me. In finding my voice and telling my story, I had broken a cycle that might otherwise have continued for generations. And in doing so, I had become more than what she had reduced me to, more than a disappointment, more than a project, more than a dog. I had become fully myself. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that sharing your truth can be the first step toward healing. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of overcoming family trauma. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you are always more than how others have treated you.